What if I told you that Japan's world-class chips, top-tier luxury cars from Toyota and Honda, and even their most advanced fifth-gen fighter jets are currently being held by China right at the throat, and that at any moment they could all turn into a pile of useless scrap metal? Would you believe me? This is no joke. We're barely 5 months into 2026. And the foundational logic of Japanese manufacturing has been completely turned upside down. Today, let's talk about how two secret lists in China's hands are driving Japan, a country that was once a manufacturing superpower, straight into a dead end. To really understand this crisis, we first need to meet today's main character, tungsten. Now, you might not hear this word every day, but in modern industry, this stuff is an absolute god. Tungsten has a crazy personality. Its melting point is a staggering 3,410 degrees Celsius, the highest of any metal on Earth. On top of that, its hardness is second only to diamonds. Under extreme heat, it doesn't soften, warp, or expand. This God-given trait makes it the absolute core of modern military and cutting. Edge industries' armor-piercing shells need it for their cores. Otherwise, the second they hit tank armor, the heat from friction would literally melt the warhead. Missile nozzles need it as a lining. Because rocket propellants burn at over 3,000 degrees, any other metal would turn to liquid in seconds. Engine blades for F-35 fighter jets and the cutting tools used by high-end machine tools to process hardened steel. Without a tungsten coating, they're just piles of junk. But where it gets even more lethal is in the semiconductor field. What is the hottest thing in tech right now? And NVIDIA's AI chips. During the chip making process, you need a gas called tungsten hexafluoride to deposit an ultra-thin tungsten film inside the chip. Without it, there is no way to do the vertical wire filling for high-bandwidth memory, or HBM, which is booming right now. And without HBM, NVIDIA's legendary AI accelerator chips would be stuck on the drawing board. Not a single one could be mass-produced. Now Japan's fine chemical engineering is indeed top-notch. Companies like Kanto Denka Kogyo and Central Glass combined make up a quarter of the world's high-end tungsten hexafluoride capacity. Their process can push the purity to 6 nines. That's 99.9999%. Out of 1,000,000 molecules, they only allow a single impurity. But Japanese manufacturers forgot one fatal detail. If you want to make 6 nines high-end gas, you first have to feed your machine 6 nines raw materials. High-purity tungsten powder. And in the past, almost 100% of this high-purity tungsten powder came from China. China doesn't just produce 82% of the world's tungsten concentrate, it holds an absolute monopoly over the refining process. For the past decade or two, China sold this tungsten powder to Japan by the ton at dirt. Cheap prices with a supply that was both stable and abundant. Japanese manufacturers got incredibly arrogant, thinking their distillation towers were their ultimate moat, while treating China's tungsten powder like common dirt. They had absolutely no clue that the moment China tightened this valve, their entire tech empire would instantly lose its foundation. Now that you get how important tungsten is, let's look at the massive plot twist that happened in 2026, and you'll truly feel the sheer despair of the Japanese. Starting in February 2026, on China's export bills to Japan, the numbers for two specific things dropped straight to a cold, hard zero, and those are the tungsten carbide and high-purity tungsten powder we just talked about. Then came March, April, and May. Months in a row, completely zero. This wasn't a gradual slowdown. It was a clean, sharp cut. The reason is actually very simple. Starting January 2026, China officially implemented strict regulations on export control of dual-use items. The moment the pipeline closed, Japan's most famous industrial giants were instantly exposed. Sumitomo Electric, over 280,000 employees worldwide. Their president, Osamu Inoue, openly admitted at a May earnings call, procurement from China has completely stopped. For the ultra-hard tools they desperately need to make car and aircraft parts, 30% of their raw materials used to rely entirely on China. Mitsubishi Materials, one of Japan's biggest diversified non-ferrous metal giants. They announced that starting in June, the price of tungsten containing materials would skyrocket to over 3 times the original price. And even with that price hike, it nowhere near fills the bottomless pit left by the supply cutoff. NS Tool, even worse off. They straight up revealed that tungsten prices shot up nearly 7 times within a year, leaving them so terrified they didn't even dare to write down their financial forecast for fiscal year 2026. The raw material pipelines for hundreds of these downstream Japanese companies were completely shut off. After toughing it out for 5 months, their inventories were completely bone dry. On the 1st of July 2026, the two chemical titans, Kanto Denka and Central Glass, finally broke down and officially announced a total shutdown of tungsten hexafluoride production. They essentially washed their hands of it and notified South Korean semiconductor giants like Samsung and SK Hynix. We're out of stock for the second half of the year. You'd better find someone else. Right now, for them, there's only a thin line left between a production halt and total bankruptcy. If tungsten was the heavy hammer that just dropped in 2026, then China's other trump card restrictions on rare earths came even earlier and hit even harder. As early as April 2025, China imposed export controls on 7 types of heavy rare earths, including dysprosium and terbium. By November 2025, because Japan stepped on China's political red lines, the approval process went from tedious to completely frozen. And when the new regulations officially took effect in January 2026, export reviews for Japan turned into a flat-out de facto ban. The data does not lie. From January to April 2026, the total export volume of these 7 regulated rare earths to Japan plummeted by 34% year-on-year. In March alone, it collapsed by 88%, followed by an 82% drop in April. What's even more fatal is the surgical precision on specific categories. Dysprosium and terbium, the absolute lifeblood for EV permanent magnet motors and military-grade magnets. Exports to Japan dropped completely to 0 starting in January. Yttrium, used in laser equipment and aerospace. Exports crashed by over 90%. Europium and samarium, used in LCD screens and nuclear reactors. Supply was almost entirely cut off. For years, Japan has been screaming about diversifying its supply chain. Yet, as of 2024, they still relied on China for nearly 72% of their rare earths. Now, karma has arrived at breakneck speed. Shin, Etsu Chemical, the world's biggest rare earth magnet maker, straight up announced they are stopping all new orders. Auto parts giant Aisin cut production on some lines by 30%. The hardest hit is Japan's absolute backbone, the automotive industry. Toyota was forced to suspend 14 production lines, Honda's Suzuka plant faced frequent interruptions, and core Toyota suppliers like Denso and Tokai Rika have been slashing their orders left and right. The Japan Automobile Manufacturers Association predicted with deep grief the rare earth shortage will cause a production drop of at least 800,000 vehicles, translating to a direct economic loss of a whopping 2.5 trillion yen, or about 16 billion US dollars. Japan's auto industry outputs around 8 million cars a year, so this means over 10% of the entire system is instantly wiped out. And that 10% plus happens to be the thinnest margin, most fragile part of the whole business. Seeing this, a lot of you guys might ask, Japan is super rich, right? Can't they just go to the US or Vietnam, buy up scrap or raw ore, and purify it themselves? Well, Japan tried exactly that. In March 2026, Japan's imports of tungsten scrap from the U.S. skyrocketed tenfold year on year, and they scrambled all over Vietnam and Australia looking for mines. But sorry, they all crashed headfirst into an insurmountable wall: refining and purification capacity. Take tungsten ore, for example. The most stubborn impurity inside is called molybdenum. These two elements are literal brothers on the periodic table, and their chemical properties are almost identical. Trying to separate them is about as hard as trying to completely separate salt from MSG in a bowl of soup. To conquer this challenge, China spent a full 30 years. Generations of engineers ran tens of thousands of batches of experiments in factories just to figure out a hydrometallurgical process that adds a sulfidizing agent to the solution. The sweet spot for this separation is narrower than walking a tightrope across a canyon. If the pH is off by a hair or the temperature fluctuates by a single degree, the purification efficiency instantly collapses. These core parameters aren't in any textbook. They are purely empirical data paid for with mountains of real cash by Chinese factories. The U.S. scrap that Japan bought back saw its price rocket from under $40 a pound to $167.5, more than a four-fold increase. But when they got it home, they were completely blindsided. The impurities inside were incredibly messy and complex. Japan's own distillation towers had absolutely no way to purify these crude powders into the ultra-high purity required for semiconductors. You guys have to understand one concept. Having minerals doesn't mean you have a supply chain. China doesn't just hold 52% of the world's tungsten reserves. It controls over 90% of the global capacity for high-purity tungsten powder and rare earth refining. Sure, Vietnam has mines, but their refineries are less than 1% the scale of China's. Yes, the U.S. has scrap, but their purification tech is still paralyzed inside university labs. A supply chain isn't ready just because you dug something out of the ground. There's an entire industrial chain in between, and the keys are all held by China. As for all those fake news stories buzzing around the internet, like Japan announcing the discovery of the world's third largest rare earth mud reserve 6,000 meters deep off Minamotori Island, Japanese media went wild celebrating. But anyone who can do basic math knows that right now, not a single country on Earth possesses the tech for commercial rare earth mining at 6,000 meters under the sea. Even Japan's Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry admitted they won't even start studying the feasibility until 2027. By the time they actually extract anything, we're talking at least a decade down the road. Meanwhile, strategic reserves will eventually run out. You can't bridge that time gap, and Japanese companies won't even survive until next year. In reality, long before Sino, Japanese relations took a major nosedive. Export approvals had already slowed down. But Japan completely failed to use that one-year warning window to find effective alternatives. They didn't build new supply chains, nor did they adjust their political course. The control list released by China's Ministry of Commerce this time is insanely detailed, down to the exact customs HS codes covering everything from ammonium paratungstate to various tungsten alloys. The root cause of why things got to this point is entirely political. In November 2025, top Japanese officials crossed the red line regarding Taiwan, directly provoking China's core interests. Consequently, in January 2026, China upgraded its controls into an outright ban in accordance with the law. This is not a trade issue that money can solve. And with the passing of Yohei Kono in June 2026, the last pro-China political veteran in Japan, the final window of communication between the two nations slammed shut. Right now, just to survive, Japanese companies are being forced to relocate their assembly processes and factories for tungsten products, rare earth permanent magnets, and semiconductor materials directly to mainland China on a massive scale. It's just like back in 2010 when the rare earth supply crunch forced Japanese firms to build factories in China. That move boosted the rise of China's domestic magnet industry. But this time, the scale is much larger, shaking up nearly half the bedrock of Japanese manufacturing. With a weak yen, skyrocketing national debt, and a third of fiscal revenue going just to pay off interest, Japanese manufacturing was already facing systemic risks. The cutoff of these two material lists became the ultimate direct catalyst. Those once arrogant Japanese corporations suddenly woke up to a harsh reality. All the fine craftsmanship, patent tech, and market dominance they built over decades lost their leverage the moment they were stripped of cheap, stable, foundational materials from China. A raw material that accounts for only a tiny percentage of the product's total cost can completely freeze an entire assembly line simply because you can't buy it. The myth of Japan's manufacturing supremacy wasn't defeated in the market by some powerhouse competitor. It simply lost control at the most fundamental level. When your absolute core competitiveness is built upon a valve that China can shut off at any given moment, your superpower myth is nothing more than history.